Hello, how are you, everyone? This is the fourth conference on peace building from a gender perspective. This is truly a luxury for us to have this panel with us of wonderful people with us. It is called Transitional Justice as a Path to Peace, the importance of a differentiated approach in developing public policies for transition processes. This panel has been organized by Sonia Perkik. She will be moderating. She is a postgraduate student, advisor and specialist in context analysis regarding persons who have suffered disappearances, torture, extrajudicial execution, and gender violence. Sonia, welcome. Please, yes, you have the floor, Sonia. Thank you so much. Elvia, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sonia Perkic. What an honor to be introducing today. Quite an interesting panel with star panelists. Let me explain a little how we've reached transitional justice and the importance of a differentiated approach in developing public policies for transition processes. We have been going through grave stages of violence in Colombia and in other countries. We have hundreds and people who have disappeared and 70,000 victims, and this is a situation that has not been looked into through justice institutions or human rights organizations in Mexico. We are facing this, and the state is trying to face the situation, and thus we have a reality of 99% of impunity in the cases we see every day. Now, in the face of this situation in many countries, there has been a possible answer, a response to change a climate of violence and the implementation of transitional justice, how to go from one to the other for peace building. Peace is understood as not as the absence of conflicts, but a way to mediate those conflicts. What does transitional justice mean? Promoting processes of memory, truth, and justice. Transitional justice with public policies and creation of state institutions responding and meeting those needs. In Mexico, the juncture after the change of administration has opened public discussions on this. So today, in this panel, we're going to be reflecting on challenges and minimum conditions that are necessary to promote transitional justice processes in Mexico, and the importance of a differentiated approach in developing public policies for transition process. What does this differentiated approach mean? Today, if we see who the violence victims are in Mexico, many population groups are suffering this, and they have many characteristics. Let me introduce the three panelists. Well, thank you, Carla Quintana, for accepting to participate. You know, you're out in the field working right now. Carla Quintana, Commissioner, National Commission for the Search of Missing Persons in Mexico. She has led the Victims Care Commission as well. She has a BA in law and Hispanic literature, and also a master's from the University of Barcelona on sexual issues. And she is also working with Harvard. She has a PhD of the National Commission for the Search of Missing Persons, but she has the PhD for the National University of Mexico, UNAM. I would also like to welcome, yes, Jo Marie Burt, PhD, professor at George Mason University and the Washington Office on Latin America, WOLA. She is an expert on human rights, political violence, and transitional justice in Latin America. She's been working also on these issues in Peru, an international observer in terms of the Alberto Fujimori cases and other cases as well. She has worked in human rights in Peru and also at the Inter-American Human Rights Court. She's monitoring judicial processes related to the armed conflict in Guatemala for International Justice Monitor. She has just written a book, Transitional Justice and After Civil Conflict, Peru, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Those are the cases in her book. And last but not least, Anna Pekova. Thank you for accepting this invitation. She's been working for over 15 years doing human rights work related to women, and she's executive director of Equus Justice for Women, Justice for Women. She has been a consultant for different international organizations and has worked in different countries. Before arriving in Mexico, she was a researcher supporting reconciliation and conflict solving processes in the Balkans with a gender perspective. For Equus, she was working for the Ford Foundation for Mexico and Central America, promoting sexual reproductive rights, the rights of people with HIV, and DART as a strategy to empower indigenous women. She has a master's degree of political philosophy of the University of York in the UK, and also studies on access to information. She is the winner of the National Journalistic Prize 2016. Let me invite Carla to start this panel. She will be with us for a few minutes. She's out in the field working, so she will be coming and going. Carla, you have the floor. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, first of all, Ibero University and Sonia for inviting me to this panel. What a pleasure to be with colleagues in this panel to talk about the experience we have here in the National Commission for the Search of Missing Persons. I wanted to tell you how we see the need, the obligation, not the need, the obligation to have a gender perspective in the search of missing persons in the framework of something which is more general, transitional justice. And here I will start talking about this. As Sonia said, I will have to be leaving you. I'm in the state of Chihuahua in the northern part of Mexico. I will be coming and going throughout the panel. First, let me tell you where we are at in Mexico on transitional justice in terms of the search of missing persons. We have experts here, of course, Jomar, Anna, and Sonia. They have compared experiences. They have been working in other countries. I have worked with Colombia a lot and Guatemala and Peru. We always wonder, where are we at? Where does Mexico come into transitional justice issues? If as such, we have no recognition that that's the process we're in. And over and beyond where we want to be, I want to set on the table another question. Why does the National Search Commission exist? I think that more than just the necessary discussion, very important discussion at that, where does Mexico want to go and which will be the transitional justice system a la Mexican, like we have at Guatemalan, Chilean, and Colombian. The truth of the matter is that there are experiences that perhaps are not part of a context or a parallel context. There are commissions. We exist without saying we are a link. I'm not saying we have reached the point, but we are a link of the chain to reach that point. Colombia, for instance, when they started having truth commissions, they were isolated for specific cases. And Guatemala, another case in point with the truth reports with international bodies, etc., etc. Let me go back specifically to the search mechanism in Mexico. It was created by the families just 3 years ago. The national and state commissions were created because of the family members of missing persons. There was an absence of response on the part of the authorities. The state authorities had to respond. That is, search of missing persons, it's an obligation of the state, of the Mexican state in this case, of any state really. And normally, this is done through the prosecutor's office, the police forces in all countries. In the absence, however, of work by the Mexican state in that field, we created, as created in many countries of the region, a missing persons search mechanism. Let me say something here. Those mechanisms to search for missing persons in Peru, Colombia, and El Salvador all have a different legal nature and even different authorities and obligations and faculties. Some are more independent, others depend directly on the executive branch. That is, there's no single formula for those search mechanisms. We do have, however, a recognitions on the part of society saying that institutions in charge of doing this work are not doing it. They have failed. That's why we created this commission. First, let me tell you something on the search mechanism in Mexico. Just as a set aside, let me tell you we've held meetings with women in charge of the search mechanisms in the region. They are all women, as I have said, sharing experiences. That's what we've been doing. This is a new mechanism used in different countries. So we are sharing experiences with Colombian sisters, with Peru, with Guatemala, but we do not really know what will happen with the search unit as such. When a search commission is created, when we started thinking about searching for missing persons and having a policy for that. First, a public policy for search of missing persons, and the other one with a gender perspective. The first question from state institutions would be, who are we searching for? Who are we looking for? This is an obvious question, but it is extremely difficult to answer in official terms, to know who is a missing person. And something important here is that in Mexico, the definition of missing persons is broader than anywhere in the region. Missing person is every person who's absent, that we presume this person is absent because of the victim of a crime. Which crime? Distinction. This is good because we're not only talking about forced disappearance, the individual disappearances, abductions, kidnappings, human trafficking, etc., etc., minors as well. So first we have to have the greatest possible certainty of who it is that we're looking for. We all know that in countries with a high crime rate, a high violence rate as Mexico, many people do not file any type of claim. They're afraid of the authorities and of the authorities and where they have to file their claim, or the perpetrators of the disappearance of such. So there is a problem related to know who we're looking for. The information we have, however, the first step of public policy, which is extremely important, is try to have official information. First official information, and then open all the necessary channels to try to get more information, which is not official. Extra official information. The first thing I can tell you is that through information given to us by the prosecutor's offices, that we have over 7,500 people disappeared in Mexico. And they are still disappeared. We also have information of people who have been found, but people who are still disappeared or missing, 70,500 rather. And a lot of this universe of missing persons is from 2007 until now. And we have all this information that we're now using to generate public policies. The next piece of information, which is extremely important, is who are women. 25% of this universe are women who continue disappeared. Most of them are adolescents and young women between 15 and 19 years of age. This is the highest rate of disappeared women in Mexico. And here too, we have information of the people who appear. The highest rate of women that are found is in this range of age group. This is very important in terms of public policies because the information we have is something we hear constantly, says that when people are found, that's what we want. We are wanting to find people with life, alive that is. It's also important to know the reasons for their disappearance. Why? Because there are many signs of gender violence in those disappearances, family violence, sexual violence, or et cetera, et cetera. So this is generating alerts. That's what they should do, generate alerts in terms of public policies, because we know that violences are scaling and they can end in a disappearance or feminicide. So there, this information is relevant. We also have information on places where they are disappeared throughout the country and the years. So this allows us to determine and get information, which is relevant information to generate, I insist, public policies aimed at having a differentiated approach. Yes, I will continue moving forward because I also want to hear what you have to say. Well, once we know the universe of people we are talking about, that we are looking for, it's important to say that we have opened the possibility of any person wanting to report a disappearance to do it with us, regardless of filing a claim. And this has to do with violence against women. Many women do not want to file any type of claim, as many other citizens. With us, this does not have to be done. Report may be anonymous. This is very important. How are we seeing in the National Commission a way through which we can start building, among other things, a public policy on search of girls and women? As you know, we went through a broad participatory process to build the harmonized search protocol. In this last month, it was passed 2.5 months ago. And we were able to get a lot of feedback for the protocol from groups of women to strengthen the guiding axis for search with a gender perspective. I will now concentrate on this item. 2 different activities for this search with a gender perspective. One, to have an impact on public policies and search process when the disappeared person is a girl or a woman. That's the most evident. But I also think that something that has been invisible throughout these years of institutional creation for the search of missing persons, I mean, made invisible from the state themselves, not from the women's side. This is the work in the search of women that are searchers. As you know, over 90% of the people who search for their relatives are women. The search has been directed by women and those who have faced a patriarchal state, a system it is not only patriarchal, but public officials are men. Well, these are women searchers. So when they go to the public prosecutor's office to talk to the police or the judge, it's a constant to see women searchers telling those stories of how they have faced the state apparatus. And the protocol tries to make this visible. But not only that, the protocol tries to have training and make this an obligation on the part of the authorities, because this harmonized search protocol is not only limited to work done by the commissions. We are not the only ones obligated to look for missing persons. There is a human right, remember that, to be looked for, to be searched when you're a missing person. So there are different institutions within our competences. We are obligated to search the missing persons, the different institutions that have to give information on missing persons, the Foreign Ministry, the Department of the Interior. There is a universe of institutions that have to contribute in a very binding manner to the search. Let me go back. So this protocol is mandatory for all the authorities. It was divided into two: search with a gender perspective when we're searching for girls and women, and second, how to make our work visible, the work of searching women. That's the second item. And to close my remarks, we have highlighted in the harmonized protocol different forms of search. I will not go into detail. We have individual search, generalized search, and family search. The one I want to discuss here, and we have an expert on this throughout the protocol, but specifically in this area, we have the pattern search. Everyone working on missing persons, we know that disappearances are not isolated. Disappearances, we have to see them in a context, in specific time, and the way in which we are going to have better hypotheses within their context is knowing all this information for us to be more successful analyzing the context of women disappearing and looking at it in a individual or not only that way. This protocol makes it mandatory for authorities to do it this way. Thus, we can have as many contexts as we want. I think something which is still developing is the meaning of the context in terms of the search process. All the authorities and all the academy always talk about the context of things. The detail is to see how we materialize those contexts. In Mexico, in terms of search and research, there's more development on research more than on search. However, we can perhaps have this overlap, but I think understanding one and the other is of the utmost importance. And finally, as a public policy, we've started at the National Commission with a gender perspective This has been the object of a lot of discussion in the harmonized search protocol. This is an interpretation, a progressive interpretation we've made, promoted by the Inter-American Women's Commission. That is every person. This is a complex issue I want to explain because the legislation makes a division between missing person and not found person, person not found. And phileas and phobic positions, we can say this distinction is not necessary, but we can say that in the legislation makes a distinction. What is the difference between those two classifications? The missing or disappeared person is every person absent who is absent because of a crime. This is in general terms, regardless of the crime. And not found person is the person who's absent and which there is no hint there's a crime involved. This is a big problem in many of the disappearances. As you can see, we know so many stories we've heard all the time saying, I got there and they said, no, you cannot look for this missing person. You have to wait 72 hours. So come back in 72 hours. So with or without crime, we say we have to start searching for the person immediately. That's the position of the commissions. However, the legislation says that if after 72 hours you have no hint there's a crime involved, it doesn't matter. This is not an unfound person. It's a missing person. This is extremely important because that's what the law says. Why do we change that classification? This gives us more legal tools to look for the person immediately. It doesn't mean that we're not looking for the person before the 72 hours. We have to start looking for the person immediately. The thing is that there are tools that are only in the public prosecutor's office has. So we have to know exactly what are the authorities of the commissions, but there are legal tools that can only be in the hands of the public prosecutor's office, and they're the only ones that can talk to the judge or justices. Geolocation, for instance, is one of those. Geolocation, and also phone calls. The last phone calls from the phone of the disappeared person, the search commission cannot do that. This is by law. So we have this period of time waiting for 72 hours. If there's no hint of crime, then the public prosecutor has the tools to start getting involved. Why am I saying this? I'm not forgetting. I'm talking about gender perspective. As you know, there is an international and national standard that is not being complied with, but it's there. When a person underage, a boy or girl, an adolescent is missing, we do not need to have the hint of a crime. Immediately, they open the investigation file for that kid. So in the harmonized protocol, what are we promoting? We are saying that the same standard is used for every disappeared woman. For every woman, no public prosecutor will tell us we have to wait 72 hours. That's what we are promoting, regardless of the commission's already searching for that person. We're saying that because of the context of violence in Mexico, of feminicide violence, disappearances of women, et cetera, we are going to consider that every disappearance of a woman, has to be considered as if it were a victim of a crime, and this has immediate legal consequences. So the public prosecutor has to start looking for the woman immediately because she's missing. That's what we've done until now in terms of search of girls and women. The protocol goes into effect November 17th, next week. And we are promoting this. What we would have to insist on and do is pattern search. We've made some progress on this. This is preliminary progress in terms of search groups for missing women in some states. But this is something we're just beginning. I think I've taken more than my time, so I better stop here. Thank you so much. I'm in the desert right now. Thank you so much. I continue listening to you. Thank you so much, Carla, for your important explanation. This is a very good example of the work you do, how to create public policies to meet the needs of the different groups whose rights have been violated. Well, the Commission has done important work, is doing important humanitarian work. This is something we can say in terms of a very lamentable situation in Mexico affecting society at large. We cannot just talk about isolated cases. In this harmonized search protocol, this is an attempt to respond in the face of all those needs. That there are scenarios of more violations committed on the migrant population, people who belong to LGBTQI groups, people with disabilities, etc. So this is truly an effort to have a differentiated approach according to needs. And also it has to do with developing public policies, including the relatives of those missing persons. Let me now expand the way we are looking at this, not only on Mexico, but also Latin America. What a pleasure to share this space, Jo Marie Burt. What a wonderful moment for us to be sharing a space once more. She will be talking about experiences in Latin America in transitional justice spaces as another way of looking at things in a broader manner. Her experience, she has accompanied so many transitional justice cases. Please, Jo Marie, you have the floor. Thank you, Sonia. What a pleasure to be with you, with Ana and Carla. Sonia asked me to talk about transitional justice with a differentiated approach related to public policies. I will try to explain generally what transitional justice is. What is this differentiated approach? I will focus on the search of truth and justice. To give you a few examples, according to my experiences, how in some instances we've been able to adopt a differentiated approach, but in other instances, not so much, and the implications all this has. Before continuing, I didn't know we were going to have interpretation. I apologize for my Spanish, which is not so perfect, but I will continue in Spanish. First of all, let's start out with the idea of what transitional justice is. We know this is a set of political measures that many countries, not only in Latin America, but throughout the world, they have been adopted for a degree of grave violations on human rights within a context of transition or an authoritarian regime or an arms conflict. It is a response with multiple phases, looking for the truth, criminal justice issues, repair issues, commemoration initiatives, and institutional reforms with intention of guaranteeing the non-repetition of that violence and those violent actions. Now, these are the mechanisms wanting to face systematic mass violations of human rights that in ordinary mechanisms are not able to face. Although at some point, literature and those who participate as activists or transitional justice officials, there was a debate whether truth and justice were two ends that did not go hand in hand. They were contradictory, and the same happens with peace and justice. However, I believe that in many cases, we've been able to understand, not always, but I think there's greater understanding that they are complementary components, although there may be moments of confrontation with certain purposes of transitional justice, but they seek to consolidate peace, approaching needs and claims of the victims on comprehensive justice and repair, and also for the involvement of the state institutions to reestablish the rule of law, especially fighting structural inequality. In many cases, this is the main reason for violence, as we know. In this sense, I think it's also important for transitional justice to have a differentiated approach, not only to recognize the impact of violence in vulnerable populations, but also for us to find ways to change those structures that gave way, first of all, to that violence, especially to avoid them from being repeated, and to be able to change structures that gave way to discrimination, which is right at the basis of all this. Now, the UN defines the differentiated approach as a method of analysis and guide to action. I like that really much. It helps us, those that are academics, to start thinking how this methodology also implies actions. It implies facts, public policies as well. So then, with a differentiated approach, it's a matter of looking at reality to make forms of discrimination visible, discrimination against groups, segments of the population that are vulnerable, that may be considered different by hegemonic group or the majority, as women, for instance, LGBTQI populations. I don't know how to say the acronym in Spanish, yes. And indigenous populations, Afro-descendant people, and among others, the disabled as well. On the other hand, it's also taking into account that action to generate actions and public policies giving the appropriate care and protection for those population segments. So in this sense, a differentiated approach seeks to respond, to meet the needs of violated populations and examine broader social processes to facilitate, that have facilitated rather that violence. So now I want to talk about the right to truth. And then briefly, I will go into the right to justice. The truth victims have, and in terms of the right to truth, this has been internationally recognized in jurisprudence in different countries and internationally. We have to understand what happened where are those people who were disappeared or massacred, people that are missing persons. Who are the persons responsible for these violations of human rights? And the state has the obligation of giving information to the victims and their relatives and society at large. It is those circumstances in which those violations were committed. And this is exactly what is being investigated and done. This has a dual way of looking at it, the rights of the victims, but also the obligations of the state structure. It's important to say that the construction of truth is a long-term process. that may start, because not all countries have a truth commission. Brazil had one many years later. Uruguay has never had a truth commission as such, certain investigative commissions only. So the construction of truth can start with a commission, but this is just the beginning. This is an ongoing process. There are other processes related to transitional justice, and in the process and after decades of work, they are helping in the construction of truth. And this can have many shapes and forms. One are the files, the archives countries have from the armies, the police forces, and international archives. Documents where the United States has played an important role to disclose aspects of political violence in some countries of the region. And victims' records that are made through repair programs and also finding the person, they're also a very important source of truth. Just to give you an example, in the case of Peru, the Truth Commission had 538 cases of sexual violence, mainly against women. And through the victims registry made for repair work, over 2,000 cases of sexual violence against women, also men, but mainly women, have been documented. So we're expanding the truth throughout those other processes. The justice processes are also mechanisms to know the truth. And scientific, journalistic, investigative work is also very important. That may also become spaces to build truth, differentiated approaches of the greatest importance in all this, because thus we can make visible and understand the structural, systematic nature of gender relations to help overcome violence against women, people with diverse sexual orientations. It also discloses systems that are perpetuating racial violence and inequity suffered by indigenous and Afro-descendant populations. With that approach, we can establish patterns on hierarchies based on gender, race, and class, as well as patterns abusing various vulnerable populations. I think it's also important to recognize that in conditions of war, violations against those vulnerable populations are exacerbated. So then the challenge for me in those truth processes and the truth policies, all this has to do with listening to people's voices, and for those voices to be recognized as victims of violations of human rights with a differentiated approach. I think that's key and very important, but that's not all. I think it's also important for people to have a direct representative in the process, and frequently this does not happen. And here, it's interesting to compare Peru with, with Guatemala and Colombia. But for instance, Peru had 12 commissioners and it didn't have anyone of indigenous ascendance as a commissioner. It had military, two of them. It had people from with a religious background, evangelical, and but no indigenous representative, no one speaking Quechua, among others, that it did have. It's not that they didn't talk about violence affecting an indigenous population, but the indigenous population had no representation. In Guatemala, they had 3 commissioners, one a woman, an indigenous woman. And I think that was extremely important. Colombia has taken a very important step ahead on this. They appointed an indigenous woman, Patricia Tobon, but also an Afro-descendant woman. And unfortunately, she died a couple of months ago. But this is direct representation for the Truth Commission. Doing that is a step of great importance. And I think that after that, you cannot continue not having this woman direct participation of vulnerable populations, I mean. So then, I think that another, but no, first of all, let me talk about a specific element, sexual violence against women, that there's been a trajectory, I don't know if it's positive, but a trajectory which has been important through which in the truth commissions, the first ones, the Argentine, the Chilean, the Salvadorian ones, no doubt are reports of sexual violence against women. However, there is no gender perspective with a differentiated approach. They didn't have that in those truth commissions. They did not have the gender perspective or differentiated approach. So what is the impact this has had on women? Not only because they were victims of violence, but in other senses as well. For instance, the role of head of household, the husband was not present, or the role of an activist these women had to take upon themselves, looking for missing persons. And this started changing with truth commissions in Guatemala and Peru, where there was a gender perspective. In the case of Peru, this was the fight of the feminist women inside the commission, like Mantilla, so that this would have this way of looking at the problem. It wasn't just a mere coincidence. The women fought and they won to do it this way. So I think at the end of the day, that was very important. So that the Truth Commission in Peru, as well as the Guatemalan Truth Commission, to establish that indigenous women particularly were punished through specific violations because they were women and they were indigenous. This helped identify systematic violence against indigenous women in those countries. Let us remember that in each country, well, in Guatemala, I think it was 80%, the victims of violations of human rights, 80% indigenous population, in Peru, 75%. And within that category, well, of course, this violence and sexual violence had very special characteristics. Slavery, forced slavery, domestic slavery. In both countries, we saw that. And that was disclosed in part through the truth commissions and this gender approach they had of great importance. At the same time, in the Peruvian case, at least, there was a gap, a very important violation in the context of armed conflict with forced sterilizations of women and some indigenous men. And this was done during the Fujimori administration. This is a crime against humanity, of course, but it was considered that this was not strictly part of the armed conflict. So they did no investigation. The Truth Commission was not involved. Nothing happened in this regard. And this has been, I think, challenged, questioned by feminists and indigenous communities in Peru that until today continue searching to have justice be repaired or justice be served. 200,000 men and women, especially women affected by these policies of forced sterilization. I think that there you see that the gender approach was not enough to solve this problem. A differentiated approach perhaps would have been more forceful, incorporating the differentiated impact on women. This is indigenous population, and it has to do with sexual violence. So I think I have finished the time allocated for my presentation. I haven't said everything. However, if you allow me 2 minutes, I only wanted to say that victims also have the right to access justice, as I've mentioned, and the right, for instance, to take perpetrators for justice to be served and to ask for accountability from those people. And in countries like Peru and Guatemala, they've been able to have great progress on this and also pushback that's to block and stop that progress. Here, this is very important. It's been quite evident in those two processes. Well, I've had the opportunity of watching, studying, and talking to a lot of people involved in that process, and also to follow those processes. And I see great differences in spite of the human rights focus. This was not translated into a differentiated gender approach at the moment of implementing investigative policies by the public prosecutor's office, and it was not seen in the justice processes either. So there have been many situations in which women who participated in criminal justice process have faced situations of re-victimization, and this is because there are no policies thinking about the need to protect their identity, their security, their safety, respecting their cultural traditions and customs, among other things. So I think this has to be remembered, and this could lead to another discussion for later on in greater detail. On the other hand, Guatemala, leadership of women there was then followed by successor Telmandana, and they have implemented specific directives. Let me talk about sexual violence, how to investigate sexual violence in Guatemala, and how to ensure that whenever there's a massacre, questions are made, questions are asked. Was there sexual violence? Usually there was sexual violence. How to guarantee the safety and security of the women, how to make sure that investigators are sensitive to women needs, especially the victims' needs, how the criminal justice can make sure that victims of sexual violence may participate directly in the process, how to protect their identity, how to not be re-victimized without having to bear their testimony many times, for it to be recorded the first time, for it to be used in the process itself. So there are various measures and public policies that were adopted with the passing of time in Guatemala to try to guarantee that women who want to participate in those processes are not re-victimized, for them to be respected. But there is always problems here. For instance, there's no system guaranteeing translation or interpretation, and this is a country with 24 different Mayan languages, and there's no simultaneous interpretation in the legal process. This is a grave attempt against their equality and access to justice. And this happens, and their public policies are not always respected either. So we continue facing important challenges in this sense. I'm sorry for taking more than the time allocated. Thank you. I will wait for your comments.
Thank you. And you gave us just an outlook about how these processes can take place in this transition and the challenges involved and the importance of a differentiated focus. The process of transitional justice is not linear. First this, then that, then that. No, these are different categories that are independent. And we always have to look where to start different places. In this example in Guatemala, about the importance to ask who are the victims so we can see how we can respond to their needs later on. In this case, access to justice to women, indigenous women that are women that speak one single language, that they are uneducated, that they cannot read and write, and they were not only ignored for decades, but also they don't even understand, they don't even question what does it mean, this violence in their bodies, in their communities, in their culture, when we're talking about indigenous communities. But this is a good example to see and make visible the importance of multifocal lenses that we must see when we need to look into the different measures that have to be adequate to the needs of the different victims. Thank you, John Marie. To start, at the beginning of the presentation and the panel, I forgot to tell you I wanted to give room to Carla before she left. If there are any questions, we can open at the end space to ask the questions in the chat, where I would ask for you to write the question and who you're asking the question to. It's just a brief stop. As I said, last but not least, thank you, Anna, for accepting the invitation to be in this panel, to share a little bit from your experience and your point of view, talking about gender and transitional justice, the relationship between transitional justice
Muchísimas
and
gracias,
gender
Sonia,
equality.
por la
Thank you,
bienvenida.
Sonia,
Gracias
for
también y
your
felicidades por
welcome.
jalar, por organizar este espacio, esta
Congratulations for
conversación.
organizing this
Agradezco la
space and this
invitación también
conversation. I
a la
thank
Ibero.
the
No es la
invitation
primera
by
vez que
Ibero.
estoy en este espacio.
It's not the
Igual la vez
first
pasada
time
me fue con
that I'm in this
muchas
space.
ideas, con muchas cosas
Last
para
time
seguir
I left with many
reflexionando.
ideas and things to
Me da
reflect
muchísimo gusto
upon.
compartir este
It's a
espacio
pleasure to
con
share the
mujeres como
space
Carla,
with
como
the
yo Marie,
women
que
like Carla, with Jo
sigo, cuyo
Marie,
trabajo
that I
sigo y
follow. I
admiro mucho.
follow their work and I
Me
truly admire.
parece, primero
I
antes
feel,
de empezar a hablar, me parece
before I
muy
start
refrescante,
talking,
¿no? Que se
I think
organice
it's
este tipo de
so
espacio,
nice that
que se
this type of
organice este
spaces
congreso
are
para hablar sobre
organized,
paz.
that this
La
Congress is
mayoría de las
organized to
veces
speak
nos
about
juntamos y
peace.
hablamos de
Most of the times,
impunidad, de violaciones
we talk
graves de
about
derechos humanos y
impunity,
acabamos,
about
la esencia
serious
es la misma, ¿no?
violations of
Nos
human
movemos en el
rights.
mismo marco, pero
We move
ponerle esta
around the
sombrilla,
same
¿no? De paz, que el
framework,
propósito,
but
el
to
objetivo es
have
pensar a
this
dónde queremos llegar,
umbrella
creo que
of
es muy
peace,
refrescante en el
to
contexto en el
see
que
where we're
normalmente
going.
nos
I think it's
movemos
so
en
refreshing in
México,
the
por lo
context
menos.
that we move, at least in
Ahora,
Mexico.
para mí es muy importante
It's so important
empezar
to
a
me
hablar por qué hablamos de
to
la
talk about
necesidad de paz,
why we
cómo se
talk
ve
about
esa
the
paz
need
y en
for
quién
peace,
pensamos, ¿no?
how we
Cuando
see
hablamos
this
de
peace, and
paz.
how we think
Uno, el
about
contexto es
when we talk
grave
about
en
this
México.
peace. In, in,
Llevamos
in
ya más de una
Mexico,
década
this
desde que
might be
arrancó esta
serious,
famosa guerra contra las drogas,
since the war
que es
against
muy
drugs
relevante porque
started,
abrió
which is
la
extremely
puerta
relevant
a
because it
la
opened the
militarización
door
de la
to the
seguridad pública, trajo
militarization of
muchos
public
cambios, muchas afectaciones graves
safety.
para
It brought
distintas
so many
poblaciones, no solo
changes,
para las mujeres,
so much
pero me gustaría
damage.
como representante de
But I
una
would
organización
like, as a
feminista que trabaja para
representative of a
garantizar el
feminist
acceso a la justicia para
representation,
todas
to
las mujeres,
guarantee
¿no?
access to
Sí me gustaría
justice,
enfocarme un poco más en el impacto sobre las
I would like to
mujeres.
focus
No
more in
tenemos
the
datos
impact for
muy
women.
precisos, pero un
We don't
saldo
have very
así
specific
grosso de lo que hemos
information.
vivido en esta última década y
but
quizá un poco
something that
más son
we have
más de
lived throughout
280,000
this
personas
decade and more
asesinadas.
than
Seguramente Carla tiene mejores
280,000
datos,
people
pero
that have
estamos
been
hablando de más de
murdered. Maybe
61,000
Carla
personas
has more
desaparecidas.
information,
Ya
but
hemos
more than
sobrepasado
61,000
3,600
persons
fosas.
disappear.
Tenemos entre 1 y 8
6,300
millones de
things that have
personas
disappeared. We have
desplazadas
between 1 and 2
internamente por los
million
efectos
people
de la
that have been
violencia y
displaced with the
tenemos un
violence,
sinnúmero, un
and
sinfín
we
de
have
personas que han sido
a
víctimas
huge
indirectas.
number
Entonces
of
no me
people that
parece
have been
raro, ¿no?, que muchos
indirect
estamos buscando de hablar
victims.
sobre México como un contexto de conflicto armado,
And
como
we
un
can talk
contexto
about
que ya requiere
Mexico as
pensar en
armed
soluciones
conflict
como y
that wants to
estrategias
think
como
about
la justicia
solutions and
transicional
strategies as
y
transitional
buscar
justice, and to
estrategias, ¿no?,
look
que no solo
for
ofrecen
strategies
acceso a la
that
justicia,
are offering
verdad,
access to justice,
respuestas,
truth,
sino también garantías
answers,
de
guarantees
no repetición,
of
¿no?, algunas soluciones un
non-repetition.
poco más duraderas. Una de las, en lo que me quiero enfocar es una de
One
las
of
cosas
the
que hemos
things
trabajado y
that
lo
I
que
would
nos hemos
like
enfocado en
to
el
work
movimiento a
on
lo
and that
largo
we have
de mucho
focused
tiempo, de
on
décadas, es
for
ir
so many
señalando
decades is to
que
start
la violencia no es la misma, la violencia que vivimos las
showing that
personas
violence is
no
not
es la
the
misma,
same. The violence
ni
that
su
we live
impacto, que
through
no
is
es
not the
igual para
same.
todas las
The
personas,
impact is
y
not
que
the
ahí hay
same for
una serie
everyone.
de factores
And we
que
have a series
tienen
of
un impacto, ¿no?,
factors
que determinan tanto el
that have
riesgo,
an
el tipo de
impact that
violencia, pero
determine the
también
risk,
el
the
acceso a
type
la
of
justicia,
violence,
cómo va a
access
ser.
to
Y ahí hay una
justice
serie
as
de
such,
factores,
and we
ya se
have a series
mencionaron varios,
of
¿no?
factors. Several have been
Está la
mentioned.
raza, está la
We
etnia,
have
está el estatus
race,
migratorio, la
ethnic
discapacidad,
group,
¿no?
immigration
Pero también
status,
uno de esos factores
disability,
es el
but
género,
one
¿no? El
of
género
these
determina qué
factors
tipo de
is the one
violencia
that
vive
determines what type of
una persona.
violence
Y ahí me
a
gustaría un
person is
poco a qué me
suffering.
refiero cuando digo
And
esto.
what
El
do I
género es un
refer
factor que
to
determina el
when
tipo
I
de
talk
violencia
about
que
what is the
viven las
factor
personas.
that
Utilizar un
determines the type of
ejemplo,
violence that people live through?
quizá el
To use an
ejemplo más
example,
explorado,
maybe
estudiado,
the
es el ejemplo de
example
los
that is
homicidios.
explored the
Hay
most
un
is
muy buen
homicide.
informe que hicieron hace unos años,
There
Data
was a
Cívica
report from
y
years ago,
en la
Data
División de
Civica,
Derechos Reproductivos y Sexuales
in
del
reproductive and
CIDE,
sexual rights
el
from
cual
CEDAR,
documenta que
that documents
la gran mayoría, digamos, de
that
asesinatos que
most
se han
of the
dado entre 2000 y 2018
murders
y sigue
between
esta
2000 and
tendencia, han sido
2018
hombres.
and this
Entonces
trend
tenemos
have been
89
men.
si uno
So we have
mira solo los
89.
datos
If we just look
completos,
at
integrales,
this full
vemos que la mayoría de las
comprehensive data, we
víctimas,
see that most
89%
of
de
the
las víctimas
victims,
son hombres, que las
89% of the
mujeres son
victims are
11% de las
men,
víctimas.
that women are
Pero
11%
cuando
of the
te clavas y
victims.
cuando
But
empiezas a
when you
hacer
look
un
at this and when
análisis
you
un
start
poquitito más fino, te
analyzing
das
a
cuenta
little
de
bit
algunas
further,
diferencias claves,
you
¿no? ¿Y a
see
qué me
some
refiero ahí? Tenemos,
key
por ejemplo,
differences.
17%
We
de
have
las mujeres
17%
han
of
sido
women
asesinadas por asfixia,
have been
comparado con
murdered
solo
by
6% de los
asphyxiation
hombres.
compared to only
El
6% of
18%
men.
de las mujeres han sido asesinadas con arma
18%
blanca, como cuchillos,
have
comparado
been
con
murdered with
14% en el caso de los hombres.
a
Luego,
weapon
de los
like
pocos homicidios
a knife.
que
From
han
the
sido
very
resultado de una
few
agresión
murders that have
sexual,
been a
el
result of sexual
86% de las víctimas han
damage, and
sido mujeres.
86% have been women.
Y estas no son las únicas
And
diferencias, ¿no? También
these are
tenemos
not the
que
only
una
differences.
de cada
We
3
have that
mujeres
one
está
out of
asesinada en el
every 3
hogar,
women has
lo
been
cual es
murdered
muy
at
distinto
home,
cuando ve uno el
which is
caso de
very
los hombres,
different
donde tenemos
when you see
uno
the
de
case
10
of men.
hombres que
We
pierde
have
la
1 out
vida
of 10
en el hogar.
that
También
has
está
been
mucho más
murdered,
común
and then
que
it's
los
also a lot
asesinatos de las
more
mujeres se
common
den en un
that with the
contexto de
murder of
violencia
women
familiar,
is in the context of
en
family
manos de su
violence,
pareja, de alguien que conocen,
in
su
the hands of
expareja, ¿no?
the
Lo cual no vemos tan
of their
pronunciado en el
partner,
caso de
and we
los
don't see
hombres.
this so
Y
much
estas
in
son
other
algunas
cases.
diferencias
And these are
claves
some of the
que
differences
no son
that
visibles
are not
a primera
visible,
vista, ¿no? Cuando vemos así
at first
asesinatos,
sight.
280,000 personas
when we see
asesinadas
280,000
México,
people murdered
y que
in
es muy
Mexico.
importante
And that is
visibilizar porque
very
no podemos
important to make it
buscar y no
visible
vamos a
because
llegar a paz
we
si
don't
solamente nos
want to
enfocamos en algunos fenómenos que
see it
vemos
differently if we only focus
en
on
el
some
espacio
phenomena that
público.
we see in
Normalmente,
the space.
en el imaginario, en
And
las
usually
narrativas
in the
que
imaginarium, in
manejamos,
the narrative
cuando
that
hablamos
we
de la necesidad de
see when we
justicia
talk about the
transicional,
need
de
of
estrategias de justicia
justice,
transicional,
of
en
strategies
el
of transitional
imaginario
justice, in
colectivo a la
the
que nos
collective
referimos a violaciones
imaginarium
graves
that
de
we
derechos humanos
refer
que
to
se dan en el
severe
espacio
violations
público.
of human
Pensamos en casos como
rights.
Ayotzinapa, pensamos
We
en
think
Tlatlaya,
about cases like
mucho menos estamos
Ayotzinapa.
pensando en las mujeres,
We're
que
thinking
vaya,
about
hemos
women,
tenido casos
and
emblemáticos,
we've
incluso de
had
mujeres que se han
emblematic
dado en este
cases,
ámbito
even
con esas
women that
características,
have happened
pero
in
casi
this
nunca
arena
pensamos
with
en
this
el hogar
characteristic, but we
como un
hardly
lugar
ever
que
think
también
about
tiene que ser incorporado en
home,
los esfuerzos de justicia
incorporated
transicional,
in
en
the
los
efforts
esfuerzos, en
of
las estrategias
transitional
para
justice
promover paz,
with
¿no?
strategies
No
to
son
promote
fenómenos
even more. These are
aislados,
not
están
isolated
relacionados, ¿no?
phenomena, they
Y
are
creo que
related.
es importante no
And
solo
I think it's
visibilizar a las
important not
mujeres
only
y lo que les pasa en el
to make it
ámbito público,
visible
sino
and what
también ir
happens in
ampliando la
different
definición
areas,
que
but to
manejamos de
broaden
justicia
the
transicional y los
definition in
ámbitos
transitional justice
que estamos
and other areas
incluyendo.
that are involved.
Mientras tanto, como mencionaba, en
In the
México hemos
meantime,
tenido algunos casos
in Mexico, we've had some
emblemáticos,
cases
incluso, ¿no? De esas violaciones graves de
of
derechos humanos.
severe
Tenemos los casos
violations
de Inés y
in
Valentina,
human
tenemos
rights, Inés and Valentina. We have seen those emblematic sentences and the series of problems for our authorities. And we can see this not only to offer access to victims, but to start thinking about ways to guarantee non-repetition. We also have sentences like Mariana Lima. Carla was so involved and she was behind all of this, that is looking to make it visible in the hands of ex-partners, partners, to change how we think in this respect. From this from this sentences, there have been a series of recommendations. What has been the response? The strategies that have been developed by the authorities to make it visible to women in this respect, but how we're short in the strategies, how this has not taken us where we have wanted, and the problems are multiple, actions are multiple, and I want to leave something here. One, of the things is to make it visible and by specialized institutions, centers of justice for women, some places that have to make it easier justice for women. There's so much criticism with respect if this has made it easier for access to justice for women. As a victim, you can be taken to the center of justice. You have to run to specialized office for sexual crime with the place that is specifically seen. And even when women get there, what they find, they're ice castles, institutions that are empty, that keep showing us the same problems that we see elsewhere. We have centers of justice that nobody else, that there's no not the thing that have been opened by a decree that same way that they started, they can and they don't know how many women they're going to have to take care of. They don't have a work plan. They don't have access to the resources, and that we have documented with policies that exclude some type of women with disability users. Centers of Justice for Women does not admit women, not even uh, alcohol, tobacco. What are we going to be, looking at? We have other strategies that have been used, the famous gender alerts, those political decisions for a series of measures at places where we have seen an increase of violence of women that women live through, but a follow-up scrutiny that we have seen through the request of access to information, and that we have documented that the money for those measures is going to be used for the mugs that says no, ni una menos, not one less, or pens, or just stuff, not training. And training for the people that operate in our justice system, maybe the strategy that has had the biggest resources with an organization that has a lot of interest with the effect of this strategy specifically. And what we have found is strategies, who is providing the training, trying to measure the effect, even corruption. We have seen that the money that is destined to promote gender perspective at work, where the justice institutions are there, has not been immune to the context that we have. We have the famous case of Fatrinar in Veracruz, a state that has an index of violence, disappearances, feminicides, just incredible. In one single year, in 2009, they have used over 38 million pesos. Even if we have sent this, like in Harvard, we have seen them, and human rights strategies are, are not big enough. And in the meantime, the violence that we're going through, it's not even, and it's not only more, but we can see it legislated. We have the advances in public security that is more and more. It has had an effect on women. There are some changes that we see in how women are dying. We have seen it since 2007, when this war against drugs have started, but the other violence persists. It's still a place that is extremely dangerous for women, a lot more than school. And we have not known how to respond to this. What happens in the public place is growing a lot, with weapons. 9 out of 6, just a huge number of women die with the use of the weapons, the effects of militarization. There's an interesting report of another organization that has seen that not only this has not been effective in the stopping the murder of men, but also neither has it been good in the case of women. We're not in a bubble. So the municipalities where there's more men that have been murdered, and the women as well. And it's important to make women more visible in justice, transitional justice in particular. I think we're here from the feminist movement trying to look at these changes in violence that lived by women to offer additional arguments in the development of strategies that would take us to a context of peace. And just to start closing, it's important to know that if we want to start moving towards peace, if we want to start moving towards this idea, it's very important to see everyone from the context, to look for policies that are inclusive. It's not enough to take care only of violations that are going to happen in a certain space, but we have to go further. And last, just to say that the search, the construction of these solutions, Jo Marie was also mentioning about this in her intervention, but I think it's extremely important to see this, that this has to happen together with the direct participation of the different groups and communities directly affected. And here, in order to get there, we need to make visible all the different areas. One is the change when we talk about militarization, and we need to see how clear it is when and how it's a type of violence that we suffer as women. It's very clear, like the disappearances, the people that have that are missing. 9 out of 10 people missing are women, and how militarization, the war against drugs, has made out of women the group in the jail system with the highest number of growth that is growing faster. It's very important to mention that what has meant the war against drugs for women. I want to leave this on the table, and a little bit later I'm going to look at this. Some women are moving forward, and this is key in the strategies in order to understand this. Thank you for giving us a critical outlook in the public policies in violence against women. And we know that Mexico in general, if we talk about defense, protection of human rights, there are institutions that are created, mechanisms, but in the case of specific measures, also institutions in the form, but not really deep down, where we stop questioning who are the victims, how are they affected, and from that point on to define the needs they have. And this is exactly like yesterday, we had that march in Cancun that we, I don't know, I can't recall, but there are things that we're going to talk about this, that we're just demanding the respect to life and the human rights, and what they got back was that they were attacked. They were attacked with bullets, and this was against women. And the situation, it's very serious in Mexico. And also to ask the question, as Jo Marie mentioned, and you took up upon that topic again, how we can change that situation as a society. We're here and we want to see what happens and the institutions are reflected in society in a way, and to see what are the situations that cause violence, what are the situations that cause the lack of equality, and go back to this item, and from that point on to maybe have different alternatives. We have reached the end of our presentations. We have 3 really interesting and different presentations that at the end take us to the same place. They were presentations from different points of view, and we can ask how public policies should be comprised to respond to what we have right now. And I want to open the space to ask questions. I can see in Zoom, we don't have any questions, so we don't have that many people. But if somebody wants to open the microphone and ask the question, it would be raising the hand, raising the hand on the chat that is available, where we can read. I can read the questions out loud, and we can ask those questions. If anybody has a question for Carla Quintana, she might rejoin us. I can send Carla the questions if there are any questions for her. A question from Carmen Diaz for Carla Quintana, talking about the identification of patterns in the case of missing women. What do they have in common? Let's see if we can call her back to be with us. Another one for Carla. What is the support for the time of women that are looking for their missing relatives? Thank you. Are there any questions for the other speakers or any comments? Carla is not able to log on. And with respect to the first question, what is the support of the collectives of women that are looking for the missing relatives? Well, as a matter of fact, the National Commission or the local search commissions, there are bridges between the different state institutions that must respond before the needs of the relatives that are looking for them, and the commission also shares the support. We're talking about international standards for investigations or taking care of the human rights violations. The families are at the core of all the actions, and for the same reason, there's a lot of work between the search commissions and the relatives that actively participate in the search and location processes. As the commissioner has mentioned, not the law nor the commission would exist without this from the families. With respect to the second question about the patterns, what is the support? The identification of patterns, disappearance in the case of women that you have identified. One of the hypotheses with respect to the disappearance of women is that they are they can have different purposes, but with purposes of sexual exploitation. But we need to understand that the disappearance of a woman, it could be the final result of feminicide that is hiding. So the figures talk by themselves or speak for themselves, because if we're looking about search and location of missing people, they're able to locate more women than men. Why women disappear or they leave, quote unquote, voluntarily, like they say when they're trying to locate women. More than anything, this could be violence suffered at the communities or the places where they live in organized crime. So there's a huge hypothesis in the women association doors that are not located in these networks of human trafficking. We have a question. What are the measures for the prevention of re-victimizations and to guarantee the immediate search of women? I dare to answer that question. As far as I know, knowing the work of the National Commission of Search, the search of people, like the commissioner has said, is the job of several authorities, not only the Commission for Search, the police and other search groups that are the main ones to search, participate, and there's a huge effort to implement the differentiated focus or gender focus in the design of search options. It's a huge challenge because traditionally we cannot generalize, but there's so many cases where the victims are re-victimized at the, with the authorities as they search for justice. And this has been, they have attempted to bring peace within the protocol that has been homologated. That question, the next one, I think it's for Ana. Could you specify a little bit more on the information that you said at the end, that the women were representing most of the people in jail from organized crime currently? Yes, of course. What we see in the jail system is what we see in the rest of the data. Women are a minority. When you see the population at the penitentiary system, it's less than 8% of the total of the people in jail. But what we have been able to see is that after 2006 and moving forward, we can see that the rate of incarceration of women grows faster than the incarceration rate for men. And we are an organization that we believe that access to justice is a universal right for all women. And that's our starting point, is that women, when they're in contact with the justice institution, sometimes they're victims of a crime looking for justice, and some other times they are accused of a crime, but all of them should have access to justice. And that's the way that we started to look at them. And what we realized is that the main answer to this dramatic increase of incarceration of women are the crimes against the health, crimes related to drugs. And there's a huge door why for the crimes against health or drug-related crimes. And this is so clear about how to get involved, or how the companies fall down, or the impact of incarceration, or later on, what are the rights when they get out of jail. Something that is clear: women hardly ever are at the center of the crimes. Often they go with their partner or their child, but they're the ones that are captured in the system more often. We see women throughout the route of the drugs. There are women that are producers, are users. There are women that are in the transportation part of the business, and what is called the mules. And the police, the authorities, do not have the capacity to investigate the criminal networks. And the only thing is when they process in our system, they are the crimes that are called flagrantry criminal. So maybe a truck that goes from Oaxaca to Mexico City, they check it, and maybe somebody from this house is selling drugs. They go and they check, and it's women, the ones that it's more possibly, and this has contributed to the growth of the numbers of women in prison. What they use or what they have are different places, but very low level of influence. So the same discrimination and very little participation that we see outside, we see it in the spaces. Are going to be free of violence against women, and we're just dealing with this in these spaces. If we only look at the justice authorities, and it's necessary that we bring the authorities, the Minister of Education, the Ministry of Health, of Development. Maybe that this can be in the longer term, that we can rethink all of this and discrimination. How can we bring all those policies that have to do with the role of women, and that we not necessarily see this as a problem of impunity, and that we see these murders, these are not solved, that we have a severe problem with this, and the problem is deeper, and not to set aside other problems like the one that was mentioned, arm control. We don't have a policy of this. Nobody's talking about this. And the growing militarization in many aspects of public life. We can open this, more armed people walking different aspects of the public life, to have so many people with weapons around in all the different spaces increases the risk of women and men of being victims and being murdered. I have a question that I would like to ask Jo Marie. I would like to know if the mechanisms could be more sensitive to the gender and the traditional than the traditional justice mechanisms, and why. I think so, and that allows me to see that when I was, I had something in mind when I was presenting. In the case of Peru, the Ministry of the Justice authorities started to investigate some cases of sexual violence. Then it was recommended us, the commission, when throughout the investigation of the justice process, there have been deficiencies from the investigators, the district attorney, the judges, to have they don't have gender perspective, they don't have the training, they haven't had the knowledge of the need of hiring certain processes with a differentiated focus. There was a military base where many people were detained, some were murders, some were released, women that were raped, there was a forced disappearance, torture, and violence as part of all of this. The district attorney, and it was a woman that was in charge of the case, wanted to discuss or to talk with one of the women that were given their they were testifying. I must say that the NGO that was representing the victims was the one that spoke. The NGO had promised women that it was going to protect their identity, but there was no protocol at the with the authorities to do this. The district attorney got ahead of the NGO, and she went to her house and talked to her, and they said, we want to talk to you. We are from the district attorney. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Her husband was in bed, and her husband did not know that she was raped by the military. They did not know that she was being a witness, because her first husband, when she found out that she had been raped by the military, hit her so bad and left her and abandoned her. She did not want to share that experience. So they knocked at the door again, and they said, we're from the police, we're from the district attorney. We want to do this. And they said, ma'am, we want to talk about the sexual violence that you suffer from the military. And she's like, be quiet. Obviously, the woman suffered again the same. I can't remember, but her husband left her. She was extremely upset. She was re-victimized. She didn't want to be a witness, and but that was not it. That was not it. The district attorney threatened with taking her to court. She says, I'm going to send the police. The police is going to be there if you don't come by yourself to testify. So that's traumatizing. You can't do that. So the woman went there with her attorney to try to guarantee her rights at, I was not able to hear everything because this was a process that was reserved, but she was extremely upset, re-victimized, and she didn't want to know anything. So this was not something that it was dignifying or that rescued her, that helped her with her dignity. No, it left her feeling re-victimized and manipulated. With this example, I was hardly hit. I was there and I was really impacted. Years later, we were able to see in the case of genocide in Guatemala, in the case of Molina Tyson, to how they made a huge effort to protect the identity and to protect their security and to testify more than once. And they wanted to understand why this happened again in Guatemala when it didn't happen in Peru. With all the experience in gendered work and with your team, and with clear ways about to deal with this type of crime in such a way that they can look at the sensitivity. As I said, this is not a perfect system, but at least you have the guidelines that establishes everything to understand these processes. I have a question. Hopefully, I'm going to have time. There was a question that I can't find on policies of security with gender focus. It was that answer this question. This is a question that says, for any of the three speakers, this is a question that I believe Anna has answered at a very small window. The question is, what would be the main challenges to have a policy of security with feminist perspective? I believe that Anna, in her last intervention, answered that. I don't know if you want to speak any further, or we just leave it at that. I don't know if Jo Mary wants to add anything. I don't have anything specific to add, but only that we should have one. In many places, there's nothing. Even in Guatemala, where in theory there are mechanisms when they're testifying, when they're giving witness, they're not necessarily mechanisms. They go back to their communities, their structures of, military commissioners, and so on. In the case of sexual violence, where 36 women, where Sonia has played a very important role in the investigation of this process. 36 Achievas women presented their complaint against several ex-members of the patrols of the Civil Defense of Radinal. And at the end, 6 of them, there were more that were able to not being detained. And the judge, at the end of the day, in the middle, with a huge situation, the men involved have been members of the civil self-defense patrols. And she dismissed the charges. In theory, she ordered that the men not go back to Radinal as a measure of protection for women, but there was no way to confirm that that was going to happen, not at that time, not with time. And women report that they have been suffering intimidation. And while another process against another member of the patrols continues, someone that was deported from the United States. Even though they had the possibility, the awareness of generated this processes for women in particular. This is being respected in practice, and that's very serious for women. Brings fear, and they say this is very dangerous, and yeah, they're right. It's very dangerous. This leaves me thinking, and I can talk more about what is not working. I think often the institutions that make this serious violations, they're part of human rights. And this is something that we're going through not only in Mexico, but in many places. We have armed groups. We have weapons that are circulating freely. And we have no mechanisms for accountability. Members are in charge. And this is linked with the feminist march in our country. What just happened in Cancun, but before it was in Mexico City, it was in Coahuila, in Chihuahua, everywhere when women are the only answer, the only strategies that have been offered in order to incorporate this gender perspective in the public security strategies have been to increase the participation of everything, to have more women in the National Guard. And we can see that neither one nor the other is the answer or has provided us with the results. And we're going to have armies, police, because we're going to see practical results in certain communities contributed to just looking and bringing awareness to the rapes, to the violations. And like, public safety or public security police forces that have been used just to control women. Nowadays, we see this in Mexico City as clear. Police women holding down women that are, marching, that are speaking up. And the same, the National Guard. So to me, the challenge is not just the context and situations when we do not need that. How the only bet that we can have to peace through these bodies, that as long as they violate the rights beyond being men and women, these are groups that have should not have any force. But we are under a study, and that this is just, they're mocking. They have made huge investments to look at the army. One of the areas with more accusations in human rights, the National Guard. This is a group that has more complaints for violations. And here we question everything. Let's think about this and what we have as a solution for gender perspective. I agree with you. Yes, they're mocking. All the processes are mocking us. A few days ago, I was asked to discuss 8 different topics in so many hours, and this was a checklist that I had to go through. And there was not even a possibility of going deep in any question. So, they out in the open are trying to do so much, but they're missing so much. We're getting to the end of our space. I'm going to answer very quickly a question that says to the inside of the country, is very common to listen to the authorities, the disappearance of their daughters. And they said, oh, she went away with her boyfriend. And what type of search can we have here? This doesn't happen just in to the inside of the country. This is something that happens throughout the country. And, unfortunately, this happens all over with respect to looking for missing women. And it has to do with the stereotypes and stigmatization of women and the homologated protocol for the search and the law of missing women. It's very clear about this. In the case of minors, like Carla explained, in the case of women, we cannot postpone the search. There's no excuse. A search can never have any excuse. From the beginning, the searching authorities have to look, the district attorney's office have to open files at a time that they find out about the news of the disappearance of a woman. In order to counteract this stereotype. Maybe she took off and eloped with the boyfriend. Well, but the authorities are obligated to look for them and to verify if the conditions are okay with respect to their rights. And if it's not that way, to take the necessary measures for the well-being of the minor. But eloping, quote unquote, with the boyfriend, and this is one of the biggest things to hook young women and girls to introduce this in the social media and so on. So it might seem like it's with a boyfriend and whatever. And I want to ask one more question from our panel. This question, Jo Marie, 1 minute to I would like to ask what message you can give us here in Mexico from your point of view, the challenges that we face. Most of the processes for transitional justice that are known so far are post-conflict. At least in paper, there's one conflict less, and from here we can take a reconstruction measures. Here in Mexico, we are in conflict. We are working in conflict. This is an ongoing problem. We're in the middle of the bullets. What are the challenges that we have to face in order to talk about transitional justice? 1 minute, I know it's not a lot. This is a huge question for 1 minute, but I would say that there are two main things. One, constant support to victims of civil society in Mexico and the society, the international community, to strengthen. And number two, to generate political will. When the Mexican president got to office, they asked to different meetings about how to set up proposals because what was going on in Mexico, and everything was up in the air because there was no political offering. So we need to look at the strategies of lobbying, the suppression from the outside, from the inside, from the embassies, so on, in order to pressure the governments to assume responsibilities in all different aspects of social justice. Thank you, Jo Marie. We have so much to do. Thank you. We thank the three speakers. It has been a pleasure to speak with you, to share with you. You know, we'll thank Carla a little bit later. Hopefully, we're going to talk again at some other time, maybe with tequila when we can meet again in person. And thanks, Ibero, for the space for us in order to discuss our experience. This wonderful panel, Jo Marie, Carla, for participating. We thank you for being with us. And at 4, we have another panel today called Proposals and Analysis for Peace Building.